2 days I had two wonders. It might just have been beginner's luck, but it looked like this wasn't going to be so hard after all. I'd be on a train soon, my first train ever, chugging away from Sassafras Springs, or chugging away from St. Clair, since Sassafras Springs didn't have a train station. St. Clair was where folks went for doctoring or banking or big deliveries, like a new wagon or a stove that could only come by train. I'd been to St. Clair, and it was a fine town, but it just made me hunger to see more. The next town, and the next town. If the schoolhouse had been open, I could find the route to Colorado on a map. There'd be St. Clair, Pine Gap, and Garvey City. I couldn't remember what came next. I'd know soon enough, with just 5 more wonders to find. Then I'd be on my way to Colorado. I hoped the engineer wouldn't be stingy with the whistle. My aunt had other ideas about the trip, which she made clear that night on the porch. The rain hadn't amounted to much more than a few drops, and it was as steamy as the jungles of Borneo, or at least I thought so. Cole McAllister, if you are encouraging your son to risk his life, Aunt Pretty declared as I finished writing down Cully's story. I told her and Pa that Jeb and I had gone to see him, but I didn't let on about Cully's wonder. He could have been buried by a collapsing house. And when do you think Cully Pone, but he wasn't, said Pa, unperturbed as usual. And when do you think Cully Pone last had a bath, she asked. Poor dog could have gotten fleas from that man. Sal cocked her head. I was thinking of hiring him to do more work around here, Pa. Pa acted serious, but I could tell he was teasing. You can just think of someone else, my aunt replied, her crochet hook racing like a greased lightning by then. That woman could crochet anything from a lowly dishcloth to a baby sweater that was soft as a cloud. If a person could crochet a wonder, she'd be the one to do it. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me at all to find a great pyramid sitting in her lap someday, crocheted in her favorite shades of pink and blue. That Friday was a scorcher from the minute the sun came up. I would pick the hottest day of the year to pick up fruit, Aunt Pretty said. Aunt Pretty said the same thing every year. Sweet-smelling peaches simmered on the stove in one huge pot, while canning jars bubbled away in another pot. The kitchen was hot as an oven. It was just hot outside. Pa was already perspiring at 7 a.m. Do you think it might rain? I asked, though the cloudless sky didn't give me much encouragement. Not today, said Pa. Aunt Pretty brought Pa and me lunch in the field that noon, but she didn't stay with us to eat. Still putting up peaches, she said. They probably don't even grow those in Colorado. Not that Molly was ever much of a cook. As I watched her march back to the house, I took a giant gulp of iced tea from the old stone jug. Pa, does Aunt Pretty have something against Aunt Molly? I asked. She never said anything good about her. Molly and Eli are good people, Evan. Pa took a swig of iced tea. Don't pay any mind to what Pretty says. It's just she has had her share of sorrows, and she's never gotten a husband of her own. How come? Plenty of women in Sassafras Springs who didn't have good looks or good qualities had husbands. She had admirers, but she fancied Holt Nickerson, Pa recalled. He bought her apple pie at a church social after competing with 2 rivals for her attention. I'd never heard of this Holt Nickerson before. What happened? Well, sir, Holt was raised by his aunt and uncle, the Culpepers. His cousin Ned said Holt had quite a habit of sleepwalking. He said they never knew where he'd end up in the morning. Once they found him all curled up in the corn crib, and he had no idea how he'd gotten there. Another time they found him leaning against the milk cow, sound asleep, both of them. One night Ned heard somebody stirring outside. He hurried downstairs and got to the door just in time to see Holt jump on his horse and ride off in the moonlight, dressed in his long John's boots and a hat. Ned ran after him, and when he got a glimpse of Holt, he could tell he was asleep with his eyes wide open. Didn't he ride after him? Of course he did. Ned rounded up the whole family. They searched high and low, but no one in Sassafras Springs ever saw hide nor hair of Holt again. I had to sit and think about that story for a bit. He rode off in his long johns and never came back, I asked. It was a scandal. Your Aunt Pretty pretended not to care, but I could tell she took it hard. I think she was sorry one of those other fellows didn't get her apple pie at the social. Pa paused to chew on some biscuit. And her best girlhood friend, Callie, she got herself married and moved to Oregon. Pretty hadn't seen her in years. She has a pack of children, and hardly has time to write anymore. I suddenly thought of how I'd feel if something happened to Jeb. What happened to those other fellows that liked Aunt Pretty, I wondered. Married other girls, sad to say. Now, Eben, if you'd ever mention a word of this to your aunt, there'll be trouble for you. I promised I wouldn't, but it took a lot of weeding for me to get the picture of Holt Nickerson riding off in his long johns out of my mind. That afternoon, Pa told me I could leave a while as long as I came back with a sack of sugar for Aunt Pretty by supper time, and 2 dozen clothespins, too. That woman really went through the clothespins in a hurry. Sometimes I thought she must chew them like lollipops. My first stop, though, was to drop by Jeb's place to see if he wanted to go searching for wonders again. I've got to work. Jeb plopped down on the ground next to the potatoes. Charlie and Bessie were doing somersaults while Joey squashed tomato worms as fast as Flo and Fred could pick them off the vines. You're a lucky dog to get so much time off, Jeb told me. Time off? I just worked so fast that I finished early. Sometimes that Jeb could get under my skin. Pa said I looked like a cyclone tearing through the field, and Aunt Pretty said I must have swallowed my lunch whole so I could get out of there. I don't see why you're so fired up about this wonder thing, Jeb said. You're never really going to see those faraway places. Sure I am. Remember that book by Hardy T. Lang that Miss Collins brought in from the lending library in St. Clair? He's that fellow who traveled to all those far-off places, living in jungles with the natives and finding lost temples and sailing on junks and such. Junks? Chinese boats, I explained. Remember the pictures in his book? Sometimes I wondered if Jeb paid a lick of attention to the teacher. Jeb sat back and stuck a long blade of grass between his teeth. That's okay for somebody in a book, but real folks don't do things like that. Hardy T. Lang is a real person. I saw his picture, and you did too. I'm tired, whined Bess, trying to jump on Jeb's back. You got any candy? Eben asked Flo. Leave us alone, you little beggar. Jeb shooed his sister away and chewed on his piece of grass a while before he said, Must be kind of lonely out there in the world, not knowing anybody. And if you do meet somebody, they don't speak the same language. If you and I went together, we'd speak the same language. Jeb lay back in the grass and stared up at the sky. I don't know, Eben. My folks are counting on me to take over the farm someday. It doesn't matter so much for you. You don't have any brothers or sisters. Maybe your pa wants to sell the farm so he won't need you anyway. He turned on his side, facing toward me. Maybe I'll go on an adventure with you sometime, but if I do, I'm coming back here. I know Jeb never meant any harm, but his words stung me like a bee. It wasn't my fault. I didn't have brothers and sisters, and Pa never mentioned he wanted to sell the farm. He needed me plenty. Hadn't I worked my tail off for him all morning? I've already had enough weeding and plowing to last a lifetime, haven't you? I asked. All Jeb said was, those natives, they can be dangerous. They have poison darts. I guess he remembered the book after all. I've dealt with Orville Payne and Cully Pone, I told him. I don't think a few natives will bother me any more than them. I stood up. To tell the truth, I was disappointed with Jeb. It would have been fun to see the world with him, but if I was going to find wonders, it appeared I was going to have to find them alone, in Greece or Africa or even Sassafras Springs. See you later? Asked Jeb. Yep, I said. Come on, Saul, I told the dog. Let's go searching.